What if I told you it doesn't take 13 years to educate a child? It takes closer to 90 hours, and everything else is just noise. Well, today I'm going to be sitting down with a mom of 15, an OG homeschooler of nearly 40 years of experience. And we're unpacking what children really need to learn and what might be completely unnecessary. Hello, my name is Janae Daniels. I'm a wife, a mother of 6, and a former middle school teacher turned homeschool mom. Are you thinking of pulling your kids from the school system like I did, but you are scared to death and don't know what to do next? Well, my friends, I felt the same way, and you have come to the right place. I am here to help your family leave the school system so that you can take the hearts and minds of your children back. Welcome to the School to Homeschool podcast. Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I am so excited to have today's guest on. She is a podcast host and a YouTuber and a very, 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 very long time OG homeschooler with 15 children. Her name is Sherry Hayes, and she hosts the YouTube channel and podcast at Mom Delights. Is that correct?
That's right, Mom Delights.
Sherry, thank you so much for coming on today.
Sure, I love your channel. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. I love your channel as well. So will you just share a little bit about your story? Because you've got 15 kids, and you are an OG homeschooler who homeschooled for 35 years.
Oh, actually, it's coming up to 37.
Oh my gosh, yes. That's amazing. Mm-hmm. I want you to tell your story of what made you decide to homeschool when it wasn't quite a thing yet.
Yeah, definitely not. Okay, so I learned about homeschooling. I was in the United States Army. I enlisted when I was 18 because I wanted to earn college money. And I met my husband when I was on delayed entry. And then I went through basic training, and I figured, wow, I've been through basic training. It's crazy. So if you can do basic training in the Army, you can probably do anything else in your life. And and it's a breeze. No, anyway. I met my husband, and I went through all my training stuff. And, I had to learn to speak the Czech language because I was in military intelligence during the Cold War.
Wow.
And so when I was in California, I met this Christian couple, and the wife kind of mentored me. I got pregnant. I had my first baby, and she mentored me the whole time. And I was a believer, but I really didn't know how to live the Christian life. And I had to rely on other believers to show me how to be a mother, because I was kind of taught to be a feminist. And so I didn't really know what in the world I could do with a baby.
Yeah.
But, God blessed me, and I went through that. And and when I was overseas without my baby, my husband was in the States, and I had to go to Germany and be without her for a couple months. And I thought I was going to die because I missed her so terribly. And this couple got stationed the same place I was. So I would go over their house. And when I was over their house one day, she said, "Oh, we're going to homeschool our kids." And I thought, you are crazy. Okay. This was in 1984. All right. So I had never heard about homeschooling until she told me. No one had ever heard about homeschooling. It was not like everybody goes to school. You didn't even think about it. And I thought, you are nuts. I thought, and I argued. I was in her kitchen, and I argued with her. I said, your kids are not going to know how to deal with the real world. They're going to be so backwards. There's no way you can teach them what they need to know. And I argued with her for like an hour, and she was still my friend. Anyway, so then I got pregnant with our second child, and I left the military, and we came to the States, and I didn't think about it again until it was about time for me to put our first baby into school. This is our oldest daughter, and she's been on my podcast before. And I thought, oh, I just can't live without her. I had the regular angst that every person has, whether you homeschool or not. When they're 5 years old, and you're thinking, I don't know if I want to submit my child to that. I don't know if I can let her go and be under someone else's care. I've just spent so much time with her. I just love her. I can't help it. So I looked into homeschooling, and this is 1980. Let's see, she was born in 83. So it's like 1988, 89. I'm looking into this, and fortunately went to a church where all the ladies were homeschooling. The Christian ladies were all homeschooling. And so I had a lot of mentors there too, and so that's kind of basically how I started. And I started
Mhm.
in a very conventional way, and I bought curriculum, and none of
Mhm.
it worked. And our first child was,
That was us doing. None of it worked, and there we are.
none of it, it would shell out a lot of money. And as we
Yeah.
had more children, I thought, there's no way we're going to keep up with this. Like $200 or $300 a child per
Yeah.
year. Back
Yeah.
then, that was cheap. Today, I know, but back then it was a lot of money. And she just was not catching on no matter what we did, because
Mm.
she was a late bloomer. Of course, we had to label her because of all of our relatives who kept calling me, is she reading it, is she reading it, is she reading it? And then they'd say, do you think she's lazy? And they'd say, do you think she needs drugs? All those kind of things.
You're like, thank you. Thanks, friends.
Yeah, thank you so much. Anyway, and so she had her own sense, like her younger brothers and sisters were like already reading, and here she was having trouble. And I used rod and staff and taught them and used phonics and all that kind of stuff, but she just wasn't catching on. Now today, she's grown up to do amazing things, and
Mhm.
she understands her own children who have struggled, and so it's just amazing, the story. Okay, but
Oh,
back
that's cool.
then it was crazy. So I went through all that kind of stuff, and at a certain point, I said, I'm throwing out these. I got online. I'm really old. Okay. So back then, what we did is we did email lists, and we would share things with each other over the internet, but it was via email lists. Like you
Mhm.
get these digests of everybody back and forthing. And I learned about Charlotte Mason through one of these things. So I
Hmm.
looked her up, and I found out, I thought, wow, I don't have to do like all this curriculum stuff. I can do something different. So I started
Yeah.
branching out. And then I learned about unit studies, and I started doing those, putting my own together and doing different things. And then at a certain point, I was doing all this stuff, and we were going crazy. And I did unschooling for a while. Yes, I confess. So anyway,
I have
uh,
also.
so I did that for a while, and it was exciting and everything, but we are kind of missing on some basics,
Mhm.
that I didn't feel comfortable with that. So anyway, so God, like in like 2007, 8, kind of in there, all of a sudden I discovered the McGuffey readers and the Ray's arithmetics, and I don't remember how. I
Yeah.
don't remember how. And I got connected with a fellow who does, it's called Dollar Homeschool, and at the time he put out CDs with all these old books on it. But and now they're digital downloads, I think.
Mhm.
But during that time, that's what he was doing. And so I connected with him, and I wrote the introductions for those things.
Wow.
So I had to do research in McGuffey, on his life, and Ray, Dr. Ray. I had to go into all that. I went to everything. It was a lot of fun because it gave me an excuse to do something creative, and I was
Yeah.
making a little bit of money, and it was good.
Well,
And
and
so,
and you're speaking my language with vintage curricula.
yeah.
Like
Oh, yes.
I geek out over it. Anyway,
Oh,
I
yeah.
digress.
And I tell you what, I used to take deep dives, and I wouldn't come up for like weeks. And I'd be like,
Yeah.
oh, every spare minute, there's more. But wait a minute, there's another layer.
Yeah. That's how I feel.
Mhm. Yeah. And so that's pretty much where I came to. And then I decided, well, how am I going to use these? And I started applying. Well, part of it was I wanted to give everybody a Charlotte Mason education, but I
Mhm.
had too many kids. I don't know if you have you dealt with Charlotte Mason too much.
I'm very familiar. We do lots of Charlotte Mason principles. We do narration, dictation, copy work, and
Right. Yeah. And
yeah,
so I thought, but you're supposed to like pull out original stuff every day for everybody to copy and everything. Like, I do not have time. Like I might have a nursing infant and somebody who's in 10th or 12th grade,
yeah,
how do I stretch myself that far to get all that together? And then when
yeah,
I looked in the McGuffey readers, it's right there. I've got and I know maybe pure Charlotte Mason people would say, well, it's kind of twaddle because you only get portions of books. And I know that's true. But for my kids, when they read the portion of the book in there, they went and they looked up and found the book.
yeah.
And then they would read
So it
all of it.
works. Yeah.
Yeah, so it worked. Anyway, so I developed my lesson books that kind of have it already set out. So I didn't
Mhm.
have to like. Well, at first we were using composition books. Okay, during this time, with the 2008, dip in our economy, my husband lost his job. We didn't have
Mm.
money to spend on curriculum, and so what I did was I just got a whole bunch of composition books, and
Mhm.
I just used them to the max. And I would do that. I would have spaces for them to do all these different things: copy work, narration, dictation. We had, you know, the I would take index cards. They're lined on one side, they're blank on the other. So we would glue them in to the composition book so they could draw in the composition book. And
Love
then
that.
yeah. And so for the primary lessons, when they're just learning, and you have to have, where you put the lowercase letter in yeah. I used a highlighter. And so I would highlight every other line so that they would know how to write their letters. And so I used composition book for everything. Science, we did it for history, everything. We just used composition books because then I didn't have to print anything, and it was just there. And then I developed the lesson book so that a person has it already in front of them. They don't have to do the work, but it's open-ended. So you can use it not only for the McGuffey readers, but any other book. You can use it for, Hop on Pop or anything you want to do. But anyway, and so that's my story. No, but so I didn't really use the McGuffey readers until our sixth child was in his teens. That's when I discovered him. Because I wanted a way to where our kids were more grounded in the basic reading, writing, and arithmetic. When I was trying to give them as much freedom as I could to explore and do their own thing. And I tell you, when my children went to college, the professors were always like, whoa, you know more than I do about this. Could I talk to you after class?
Wow. That is cool.
Yeah, because they had time in their high school years to take whatever they were interested in and just go full bore into it.
Yeah.
So, because we didn't do like prom, and we didn't have, we didn't have everybody spend an hour in an assembly, in the morning. They could just, as long as they did their chores and they were, respectful, and, they could spend as much time as they wanted on what they wanted to do. So they pursued it to the max, to where when they got to college and they were taking the classes on their area of interest, the teachers were like, why don't you come up here and teach?
Which is so cool.
Yeah. And so, I'm probably bragging a little bit, but anyway.
Brag away.
But, I think that's part of the magic of being able to be freely homeschooling. As long as you can take the stuff that they require in school, as I've talked about before, if you can hit your basics with something that's really potent, like the vintage materials, then when you go and you can, then when your children go on to higher learning or whatever, then they're grounded in that. Plus they have the expertise they've built themselves over pursuing it at their own pace and at their own interest. Mm-hmm. And they become experts in different areas. Now, not every child has that kind of gumption, though.
Yeah, it's true.
Sometimes they have to be encouraged.
I hear from moms a lot. They're like, oh, my child can't figure out their passions. I'm like, well, they're 10. They've got lots of time. And by the way, they might change their mind about 20 times, and that's okay. They'll end up where they need to be. Yeah. Well, and because I consider us eclectic unschoolers. Mm-hmm. I'm not a radical unschooler by any stretch, because I'm like, no, they have to know how to read, write, and do arithmetic. Like, they have to know those things. But at the same time, I want them to understand rhetoric and logic, and I want them to, but I'm not going to do years and years of classes with them on that. And I don't love curricula necessarily all the time, but we do study history, but most of the time they spend working on things that they're interested in. Yeah. And so I'm like, we're eclectic. Yes. Unschoolers. But I love the Charlotte Mason philosophy. I love pieces of the classical philosophy. I love pieces. My daughter goes to a Waldorf inspired forest school once a week, wow, so fun. Yeah, it's a blast. And she has a great time.
Because you're a forested area.
Yes. Yeah, we are very close to National Forest, we're in Colorado. So it works itself out. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We have lots of opportunity for nature.
Yes, I'll tell you what, great. That area especially is just so full of nature study stuff for free everywhere. It's just amazing.
Well, and the nature study piece, when I learned about that, because I had never heard of nature study prior to homeschooling, and when I heard about it, I was like, this is brilliant. This is beautiful. Like those are the pieces of Charlotte Mason that the narration, dictation, copy work, and the nature study and the handicrafts. I was like, these are beautiful ideas.
Oh yeah.
And what a great way to pass that on.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've loved in your YouTube channel, that's been very inspiring for me, is your 4 pillars. Will you talk about your 4 pillars, how you got to that point where you where you're like, I think that there's 4 pillars, and then talk about what they are.
Well, one thing I think that the homeschooling movement has done is it has helped mommies and daddies to come out of our public school thinking. Because purposely, if you go back into the history, we've been purposely taught that things have specific boxes that they fit in, and they don't touch each other. We've been up and taught to take all the information in and then analyze it and put it into a different structure that makes a cohesive whole out of everything. And so what happened to me, since I've been homeschooling for so long, what happened to me is that it helped me to start, okay, wait a minute. Why do we have to do this? I have heard you ask that question on your interviews, like, why are we doing this? Yeah. See, none of us have been taught to ask why. We're just like, well, this is what we do. You do this. Okay. And then you do this, and then you do this, but we don't think why. So so I've been taking my kids through all of this education stuff, but I started saying, but why am I doing this? And why did they do this? And why should my kids know this? And I started taking all the pieces, and I love to do this in general. I'm a mom of 15. I don't have a long time to, get through baloney. I need it. Okay, give me that. Okay,
give it to you straight.
Give it to me, because I don't have time for that. Okay, so anyway, so what I did was I go, well, I'm going to narrow this down. I'm tired of this. I need some kind of structure, because I hate floating around and not knowing what I'm doing, but I don't want it all with jargon and baloney. So I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, what do kids actually need to be educated? And I pray all the time. So I know that the Lord is constantly downloading things into my mind. This doesn't necessarily mean that I got this originally. I mean, God, of course, was helping me through the whole thing. But I was going, what do my kids need? Because I had a lot, I messed up a lot. Okay. So I had to go, okay, what do my kids really need to be educated? What do I want? Then I started going, well, they need to know about God, and they need to know how to relate to God, and they need to know about how to relate to people. That's important. Then I go, but they need to know how to read, write, and do math. Otherwise they're going to be lost no matter what they do. And they need to know some basic things about history and about how the world works, the natural world works, and everything. So they need to know that. And then they also need to know how to apply it, because it's one thing to have people know all kinds of facts, another thing to know how to live and apply, and like how to fix a car. And if you come up to a problem, what do you do?
Yeah.
Right. Yep. So, or if you have an interpersonal relationship that you're working on, how do you know how to work through that? Like, where do you go to find it out? How do you have an argument without killing each other?
Right.
So, all these different things that you have to take all this stuff and apply. You have to have real life experience. It's not just books. We have decided in our education system that if you can take a test and ace the test, you know everything. And it's not true.
No,
it's not true.
Especially because the next day you forget all the information that you studied the day before.
That's right. And when my husband, actually, he went back to college because he was in an unemployment stint. So he went back to college on the VA bill, because he's VA too. So he went to school, and there were people in class with him that they couldn't draw a circle, but they have a multimedia graphic design degree. But they can't even draw a circle because they took the tests and they passed the test. And that doesn't mean anything. Yeah. Right? So I didn't want my kids just to be able to, be scholarly book brain people and not know how to live life. So that was the 4th pillar. So anyway, that's how I came up with the 4 pillars. And I think that if we as homeschoolers could just adopt that, then everything else, every other decision we make, as long as we know we're building each one of the 4 pillars, then that just simplifies things so much. It gives a structure without feeling like, we are so bogged down the details that we lose it.
Right.
We lose our focus.
So the four pillars again are first, God, growing with
Gaining
God,
favor with
gain
God and
favor
man.
with God and man.
Mm-hmm.
Second is gaining the tools that you need, the reading, writing, arithmetic, so that you can
Mm-hmm.
learn other things. The
Mm-hmm.
third then is learning stuff about the world, how it
Yes.
works, everything. And then the
Yes.
fourth pillar is gaining life skills. Is that
Yes.
correct? Did I get those
Basically, yeah.
right?
Life application. Absolutely. Boy, you've been studying well.
I have. I've watched so many of your, like, I was so inspired. I've been watching so many, binge watching your videos going,
Oh, so
she
sweet.
is just a wealth of knowledge. Y'all,
That's so
those of
sweet.
you who are watching or listening, you need to check out her channel. Okay. Just that's all I'm saying. You're going to love it.
That's
You're
sweet.
going to love it. So then, what would a typical day in your family, in your homeschooling, look like once you started incorporating the McGuffey readers and
Hmm.
Rays? And then you also used Harvey's too. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that's Harvey's grammar. Uh-huh. And
Yeah.
and also Pineo's is another one, but you have to kind of digital that one because it's not sold. It's not produced anymore. So you'd have to
Pen,
download and print it out and bind it.
what is it? Peneos?
Pineo's. It's Pinneo. Pineo.
Pineo. I'll
And
have to
and
look
it's
that one
it's
up.
part of the eclectic education series that was done in the 1880s.
Wow. Okay.
But it's actually some of my kids liked it better than Harvey's.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Um,
I've loved Harvey's. I've been like, oh, this
uh,
is so. I do you know what I love about the vintage curricula is
mhm.
the. By the way, I've been corrected so many times by people. They're like, if you are speaking of curriculum plural, it is curricula, and I'm like, except for I looked it up, and it's also curriculums.
It is. It is. I know. I looked
So
it up too.
because I get so many comments, well, you are
Uh-huh.
not saying it right.
Uh-huh.
But what I've loved about the vintage curriculums is that um, is the simplicity. And I feel like we've lost that certainly in the public school textbooks because
Mhm.
I still have some that I never turned back in. And also as I've looked at a lot of the and granted I found out there's over 7,300 homeschooling curricula out there, but even
Wow.
amongst the homeschooling curricula that I've had, a lot of it's great. It's not that it's not great, but
Yeah.
sometimes it
Hmm.
just feels like it's so full of extra.
Fluff.
Yeah, a lot of fluff.
Hmm.
And for me, my brain doesn't work like I need to get cut to the chase, which is funny because I tend to ramble in my life. But in my brain, like I
I
need
know.
to know what's the meat. I need to know what the meat and the potatoes are.
That's right. Mm,
So
I,
that's what I loved about them.
I don't have time for that other stuff. My
Yeah.
kids don't. We only have, like, if you look at your own kids, right? Really, your kids maybe when you put them in school, this is a shorter amount of time. When you have them
Mhm.
at home, your kids are going to look up to you and think that you would really have the answers until they're about 10.
Yeah.
And then they go, okay, mom, well, I'll take that
Yeah.
into consideration. and
I'll
they're
think about it.
and they're developing their own selves, okay? And that's right, and that's good. But we got to take the the most advantage we can of the first 10 years while we still have them in our influence.
Mm.
And if we are wasting our time with a whole bunch of baloney that doesn't, they're never going to remember it anyway. So
Right.
if we're wasting our time with that baloney, it's just not as effective. And when we're talking about it takes, okay, our curriculum in schools and our years are just so bloated. It's so
Right.
bloated. If you listen to John Taylor Gatto, and he was
A
teacher, New
hero.
York. Yes, have you read? Well, I'll talk in a minute. He
All
was
of it. I
New
to
York.
answer, I've read all
Okay,
of his stuff.
yes,
So
he was New York City Teacher of the Year and New York State Teacher of the Year, and he had great success with kids who were in the ghetto schools. And so what he says is, like, it takes like 90, he calls it 90 contact hours to teach a child to read, write, and do the
wow.
basic arithmetic with competence so that they can learn everything else. 90 contact hours. Now that doesn't mean 90 hours when they're working on their own. That's 90 contact hours with an instructor.
Hmm.
Total. Okay?
Yeah.
Total. What are we doing with 13 plus years?
Right.
What,
Right.
what are we doing that for? It's babysitting and it's indoctrination. Those are the only two possibilities. And when
Right.
you go through and you go to the Prussian idea of schooling and you read about what's his last name is Fichte. Fichte is the guy who worked for the Prussian Friedrich the Great, I think it was. And he stood up and he gave this rousing speech to the Prussian people. And he said, this is what we're going to be about. This is what you're going to do. It was totalitarian. It was Hitler, only like maybe 100 years earlier. Basically,
Yeah.
that's where Hitler got his inspiration, was from Fichte in this Prussian idea, right?
Yeah.
And so and the Prussian system took away people's volition. It
Mhm.
it was run in a military way. Friedrich the Great, or either he or his father, were really militaristic. I mean, they would wear a military uniform for fun, and so they wanted their whole country to run like an army. And they actually, at a certain point, they told women that they would tell people who they would marry, how many children they would have. They required that women would register their menses with the government.
Unbelievable. Wow.
Yeah. And so that's Horace Mann and his ilk. That's where they got their ideas. Horace Mann went over to Prussia,
Mhm.
and that's where he got his ideas for our current public school system.
Well, do you know what I think is fascinating about that? Because at the same time, from the same area of Prussia, we
Mm-hmm.
also get Karl Marx and Nietzsche, because it
Yes.
was
Mm-hmm.
when Horace Mann, it was in 1852,
Mm-hmm.
May, I want to say it was May 1852, that
Mm-hmm.
we adopted the first compulsory education law, which you already
Mm-hmm.
know that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I want to say Communist Manifesto came out either 1852 or 1854. It
Oh,
was
I
like
didn't
it
know
it
that.
was it was right about the same time. But Horace Mann, I've wondered, like, did he must have come, he may not have come in contact with Karl Marx or Nietzsche or any of these others, but that was certainly a hotbed at the time,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
in the same area, and it's all
Yeah.
festering in the same little area.
It's like we broke away from the European idea. The Europeans had this elitist idea that there were certain persons that were born to be leaders. They were born with, were brighter than the rest. And so God made them to where they could rule over others. They didn't really regard the regular person as having any worth.
Yeah.
You can hear it in the way they talk about people. Even in, like, I was listening to some soldiers talk about being British soldiers, from Britain, and I think it was in World War II. They didn't regard their soldiers, and the officers didn't regard the enlisted soldiers as really anything but just to be used up.
Oh.
They were just cannon fodder. They've thought that so we broke away from that pagan thinking. We came to America. We established a Christian nation where Jesus died for every individual. The individual, it were made in the image of God. We broke away. We started this country, and people educated themselves. They educated their children because they had a say in the government. They had a say in what happened in their country, because they were regarded as being important, as being valuable. Why in the world did we listen to somebody who went back to the old country, learned the opposite, brought it into our country, and it made us slaves ever since? Why?
That's the question. What the other question I've had as well is, if this system was so great, why didn't Horace Mann put his kids in it? Why did he keep them out?
I didn't even know that.
Mm-hmm. He
Interesting.
didn't. He didn't put his kids into the common schools.
I don't know.
So if it's so great, why?
Because, see, that's in that elitist attitude again, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are a little cut above, but, you poor peasants, you need to be, we need to, like, keep you under. We need to keep
Right.
you kind of dumb so we can tell you how to live, because you can't do it on your own. That's totally the opposite of the American spirit.
Well, I mean, we see this still today, though. Like, I look at the tech giants where they're like, oh, here's cell phones, and get your kids cell phones and whatnot. And then you find out Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates and all the others don't allow their kids to have technology. I mean, Mark
Mm-hmm.
Zuckerberg was sending his kids to a Waldorf school, which doesn't allow any technology, and
Right.
so it's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so everything for you, but not for me. I'm going to live by a
Mm-hmm.
different standard than I
Yep.
expect you to live by,
And I
which
think there's an economic strata then in America that more than like by lineage. It's more by economic strata.
Mhm.
Although we're finding, if if you go into conspiratorial circles, we're finding that a lot of these people that are the tech giants may have been connected before they were even born. And
Hmm.
so maybe that's partly why they rose to the top. Now,
I don't
I
know.
don't know 100%, but some
We
people
can
have
guess.
suggested that. Some people have suggested that. So anyway, it may be, and they supposedly they have ties to the UK, not the UK, but anyway, conspiracy stuff.
So going back, which I want to get back into here in a second, into
Mm-hmm.
like what your day would look like. But
Okay.
I before we get back into that, I want to talk a little bit just briefly back to the vintage curricula. um I have found like I get leery of curriculum that is past 1890. I mean there's some beautiful stuff, the
Mm-hmm.
Strayer Upton,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
some
Mm-hmm.
really cool books that I've been collecting,
Mm-hmm.
but I found that I get leery once we start getting the progressive educators and John Dewey and
Mm-hmm.
Elwood Cubberley and Ross and
Yes,
some of these others
exactly.
coming in because of their
Mm-hmm.
secular humanist natures, wanting to
Mm-hmm.
take God out,
Mm-hmm.
bringing in the social sciences as opposed to having history.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
what have you found with all of the vintage curricula that you use?
Mm-hmm.
Um, have you found that it's better when it's pre
Oh, absolutely.
1890, or like talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit?
So, what happened? Okay, so in America, this is what some people have said, and this makes kind of sense, but I don't. I think it's more nuanced than what they've decided. But supposedly, we have the first and second Great Awakenings, and then we were primarily a Presbyterian
Hmm.
evangelical country. And then there was a great influx of different migrants from countries that were primarily Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so when we read in the Constitution freedom of religion and everything, it was just assumed that everybody was Christians, just different types.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
and so there was supposed to be freedom of religion, and then we had this influx of Catholics. Now, a lot of Presbyterians didn't consider Catholics to be Christians.
Okay.
And so the unfortunate reality is that when they came in at first, they were trying to fight against that by homogenizing everything. So that's where the common school movement came out of.
Hmm.
They were trying to take all these different persons coming from all these different countries and trying to make them into a homogenized American kind of a culture. And so that's what the common school, that's primarily what it was for. It wasn't really about educating children, it was about building a consensus.
Hmm.
And so when they had the materials in the schools, when they redid the McGuffies in the 1880s, what they wanted to do is they wanted to make them as ecumenical as they could.
Hmm.
That's why a lot of the things that McGuffey put in his, such as, be sorry to God for your sins and confess them, and, talked about asking, I don't know if he says exactly the phrase, ask Jesus into your heart, but it's basically that in
Okay.
his original readers. Okay, so the 1880s have nothing like that in them. Now, and people have said they're totally secularized. They are not. They have passages of the Bible in there, they have poems about God, they have prayers in there, everything, but it's not as overt as
Hmm.
the original
Okay.
McGuffies. Okay, and so that's why we still consider them, I mean, they're still better than the junk we have today in the 1880s, so they're still valuable. However, there were revisions after the 1880s, and those are the totally secular ones. They just took God totally out of the picture, and, God doesn't have anything to do with anything.
Well, I think because progress became the new god.
Yeah. Hmm.
That's the
Good
god that
point.
we're going to worship, is we're going to worship progress.
Yeah, that's a
So
good point. That's a good point. That's the progressive movement. Why didn't I get that before? Oh, you're good. Anyway,
thanks.
so yeah, because progress, it didn't really matter what it looked like, and the social gospel was really big during that time. It wasn't so much that you preach the gospel that you're a sinner, you need to worship God and Jesus. It was more of just be really good to people and do good things and be a good Samaritan, and so yeah, so they didn't really. It was it. and past that point, it kind of ggets nutty. Past that, I
Mhm.
mean, it was Horace Mann introduced things like the whole word approach that was totally unnecessary. Okay,
Oh.
and people don't know that Horace Mann was he. I don't know. I guess he had a certain Christian. I don't want to judge him. I don't know what his relationship with God was really about, but he didn't really promote God as much as he promoted phrenology.
Although he did want to keep the Bible, because I was just reading this, the
Yes,
Bible
yes.
as the center in the classroom, which that surprised me when I learned that. I was like,
I know,
oh,
but I think that's because of the pressure at the time. I don't
oh,
think that was
gotcha,
personal to him. See, he wouldn't have
gotcha.
been able to have anybody. He wouldn't have been able to influence anyone to vote his way unless he made it look really Christian,
I guess that's true. That's true.
right?
That's true.
Because he was big into phrenology. I
Hmm.
mean, I think the fellow who's like the most experienced phrenologist in America, he like learned under him. And I go ahead.
Talk about what phrenology is for just a second.
Okay. Phrenology was a pseudoscience where they would study the shape and the different bumps on a person's skull and decide that this would determine, like, if they were going to be a criminal, if they were going to go on to do good things. It would determine their character and their ability to
Hmm.
learn. So what they would do is, and this actually did happen in a lot of classrooms during that time, believe it or not, would have a phrenologist come in at the beginning of the school year, and he would touch the kids' heads, and they would take the kids that he deemed that were going to be slow, and they would put them in the slow group,
Wow.
and those were going to be just the workers. And the kids who had the good heads, then he put them in a higher group, and they would be learning higher things, and they would be the thinkers. And they actually would do that, and that's what Horace Mann wanted in all the schools.
Unbelievable. I did not know that. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, you
Wow.
can look it up. It's spelled with a PH. So it's PHRENOLOGY. Phrenology.
Chronology. Holy cow. So he
Yeah.
brought up whole language,
Hmm.
um, which replaced phonics for a very long time. But anyway,
Yes. Yes.
and it got worse in the 80s, 70s and 80s. I know that.
Oh yeah. Well, my husband was taught whole word originally in the 50s, the late 50s.
Wow.
Yeah, he's 70, so he was taught whole language, and he couldn't get it. I mean, it just
Mm.
didn't make any sense to him. So when he was 9 years old, they had a special tutor for him,
Mm.
and he went in, and she offered him a big hunk of candy bar. And he loves big hunks to this day. And so yeah, and she taught him phonics,
Mm.
and that's how he learned to read. And he loves to read. Oh, he reads better than I do. He reads all the time. Anyway,
Very cool.
um and so anyway, so yeah, in during that time it was still bad. I see people think, they go, oh, when I was a kid things were much better. Well, maybe, but do you know really how good they used to be?
Yeah.
I mean, my grandmother had told me that she didn't go to school till she was 7 or 8, and that most kids went to school they could read already, but they were taught by their parents. And she went to a one-room schoolhouse, and the late this is in the late 1920s.
Wow.
She was still in a one-room schoolhouse, and she loved it. She told me
Wow.
how all the older kids would help the little kids, and they learned how to be mature because they were told, these little kids are looking up to you.
Mhm.
You have a lot of responsibility, and they would help the teacher. They would help each other. She said it was totally a different atmosphere than what we have today.
So my husband's grandmother is still alive, and she is
Mm-hmm.
102. She will turn
Oh,
103 in a few months, and her wits are totally still about her. Like, to explain, like, she's the other day we were visiting her, and the doctor said she has to start using a walker. So she's like,
oh
fine.
my
But we
goodness.
got there, and she's like, Jason, that's my husband. She said, Jason, I need you to come and help me make the bed, because now I have to use the walker, and it's easier if there's two people making the bed than one.
Mm-hmm.
And she turned in her driver's license because she said
Oh.
she's a great driver. That's the crazy part. And she said, I know that if there's an accident, even
Mm-hmm.
if it's not my fault, I know I'm going to get blamed for it because of my age. So rather than taking that risk, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it in. Like, that's very sharp
Oh,
as a tack. So I asked her about her school, and it was, again, she was 1930s, late 20s, early 30s. She was in the
right.
one room schoolhouse. And I think one of the things that has been so detrimental to us, and it seems so normal, but I think that it's actually really quite damning for us is this notion that kids should be in grades, because it
Yes.
takes away that
Mm-hmm.
the older kids helping the younger children.
Yes.
Um, and I use the term damning because
Yes,
as
it
the
is.
time stopping progress, like stopping
Mm-hmm.
the
Oh, I
progression
see,
of what
like
needs to,
a dam on a
like a
river.
like a
Okay.
dam on a river. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because it prevents kids from helping younger kids. It prevents younger kids from looking at, okay, this is how I'm supposed to mature. And then at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, the kids that are more advanced, when they already come in, they need to be able to move forward, and other kids who might need more help. The
Mm-hmm.
age shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
matter. That shouldn't make a
No,
difference.
no.
So, but she was in a one-room schoolhouse, and they had
Mm-hmm.
started instituting high school, and so she ended up going to the town high school. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought she graduated at 18, and she's like, "Oh no, I think I was 16 when I finished."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Really?" And she's like, "Yeah, because that's when I started working." She started working as a Rosie the Riveter,
Okay.
like really, like riveting. Like she put the rivets on. She was literally a riveter,
Okay.
So, um, and I said, "Oh," and she's like, "But I graduated, So
Hmm.
I don't know. I think and even adding high school,
Yeah,
because
that
by
was a new thing.
yeah, it was a very new thing. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
also contributed to this idea of children being more oriented to their peers than to their parents, and
Mm-hmm.
causing a lot of
Mm-hmm.
just a lot of problems with that, where
Mm-hmm.
it's caused a breakdown of the family unit. It's
I,
caused a
I,
breakdown of parents and
girl,
child. And
girl, we could have a good time. You and I, we could do something together. I tell you what, I think that if we took our entire education system, if we're going to have one, right? Because not
Mhm.
everybody wants to homeschool their kids, and there's going
Right,
to
it's
be
true.
people. So if we took the whole thing and we put it back to the one room schoolhouse, we could probably solve most of
Hmm.
the behavioral problems. Most, juvenile delinquency would go way down. It would cause parents to have to be a little more involved,
Yeah.
because if you're going to know this teacher, because your kids are all going to have this teacher our whole school thing. It's going to be one
Mhm.
teacher, right? Unless that teacher like goes on to something. But
Right.
you're going to be interacting with all the different parents, because you're going to
Yeah.
have to make decisions together. I mean, it would bind communities together. It would be so. I've actually had this idea that we could take
Mhm.
the regular schools and we could turn them all into one room schools. You're with me?
I would so be with you. Well, I've even thought about, like, wouldn't it be cool to turn the schools into like community type centers where
Mm-hmm.
different classes could be taught based on interest. Like, you'd have that yes, people need to learn the reading, writing, and arithmetic,
Mm-hmm.
but then there's
Mm-hmm.
also the fiber arts classes for those that want to
Mm-hmm.
do fiber arts and artisan type classes. And then there's also the
Mm-hmm.
trades type classes. But then there's also, if you want to learn philosophy and music and, all of these different
Mm-hmm.
things, like, could we use the resources much more
Right. Well,
efficiently and effectively?
I hadn't thought of that part. I think that if, like, maybe for the pillar where we're learning the tools of learning, and the third one where we're learning basic content, that could be like the one room schoolhouse thing where we're community building and we're learning each other, we're learning the teachers, and then for the rest of the school building that shouldn't be going to waste, we could do like what you said. We could have like like you said, woodworking, automotive, excuse me, tech. We could use it for everything, and
Yeah.
we would still use those buildings, and we could still maybe have funding. But you also have to take the funding for such a thing, and you have to make it local. You cannot
Yeah.
have
Yeah,
it.
agreed.
You can't. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, as I've been studying, I've been reading Lawrence Kremen's books, the history, what is it? History of American Education.
Okay.
And it's 3 volumes, and it's been like,
Right.
reading has been
Okay.
like watching paint dry. But like could you at least have made it a little bit more interesting when you were writing it? Just like, I don't know.
Well, that's your job. See, you got to take that book and you got to write something so the rest of us can read it.
So it's interesting. But that was what happened. I mean, when we look at the American Revolution and after, that's what they had, these little community schools that met the needs of the community, and that the parents were involved. And
Mhm.
I've brought this up multiple times in this podcast, Alexis de Tocqueville talking
Mm-hmm.
about
Mm-hmm.
that they were the most educated people who
Mm-hmm.
he
Yeah.
expected to be so ignorant,
Yes.
and they were so
Yes.
educated, and
Oh,
that's all they
yes.
had. But yet by the
Mm-hmm.
time they're 14, by
Mm-hmm.
golly, you're an adult and you
Yes.
figure out
Mm-hmm.
what you're going to do with
Mm-hmm.
your life.
That's right.
But up
My
until then, yeah, go ahead.
my great grandmother only went to 8th grade. I have the census record. Okay.
Wow.
So my great grandmother only went to 8th grade. That was, and my great grandfather was only 3rd grade educated.
Hmm.
And yet he was the best farmer. My grandmother tells me that he was one of the most successful farmers in his region. My great grandmother, they came across one day, someone had been transporting the barrels of books that they had gotten from a library that shut down, and these barrels had tumbled over, and they never retrieved them. They were just on the bank of this river, and my great grandfather found these. He put them in his I guess it was a horse and buggy. He put them in there. He brought them home. My grandmother, when she grew up, they had their own library in their house, and my great grandmother would spend nights, during the Great Depression, when they didn't own a radio, but and because my great grandfather wouldn't go into debt, so she would just read poetry and read prose to our kids, and she only had an 8th grade education. But you see, you don't have to have all the crap. Sorry.
No, you're good.
If you know how to read, and you know how to do, write an essay, and you can do basic math, you can do anything else you need to do.
It's true. I look at my grandfather. Okay, so my parents are they both passed a few months ago, but they're from the silent generation. So
Okay.
my grandfathers, but on both sides, were born in the early. I think one was born in 1905 and the other 1908.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And my grandfather on my mother's side, also didn't go past 8th grade, which was typical
Mm-hmm.
at
Yeah,
that time.
it was typical, very typical.
Not,
Mm-hmm.
but by the time he was 14,
Mm-hmm.
he was running multiple companies. He started
Mm-hmm.
a distillery. As a matter of
Wow.
fact, this is kind of a funny family story. Days of probation were approaching, and the police officer, as the family story is told, came riding up on his horse on the sidewalk, and he said, "George Ronald, there's been a bootlegger around here, and I need help finding him." And he said, "Yes, sir. Good luck in finding him. I'll keep my eyes open."
It was him.
And right above the officer in his tree house, was his distilling machine. And so,
Well,
anyway,
yeah.
but then he ended up having 9 patents. If you have if you have a double-sided stainless steel sink, that is my grandfather's patent, who only had an 8th grade education.
Yeah, exactly. Because
so
an 8th grade education, like I've shared in my video on my podcast, that I have an 1853 McGuffey's Reader, and it's the 4th reader, and it would have been like 8th grade age, and I mean I have trouble following it. The sentence complexity, the vocabulary, it's like it blows me away that they were able to do that in that little one-room schoolhouse, no tech, no oversight from some big conglomerate, some big, I want to say a boardroom where they're doing all the statistics and saying that we need, and no teachers' colleges.
Yeah.
Okay. No teachers' colleges to teach us how to teach. Okay. Because teaching is so simple. I keep trying to do that. You don't need all the theories. You just need to know your child and say, I want my child to know this. I wonder how I can approach this. You can look it up. It's okay to get tips and tricks, but I'm saying it's just such an intuitive art.
Mhm.
Anybody who's ever tutored, like if you had, like I used to tutor people in high school. Even when I was a high school student, other high school students who struggled, I would tutor them. I didn't have any teaching degree. I didn't have, I didn't have to go to see. You can do it. You can do it because it's in you, because God put that in us. It's just part of who we are. We teach.
Yeah. I love that. Okay, I want you to share, and I love that you say it's simple, because you're right, and then I want to get to what you did. Because I hear that all the time, like, well, but do people have teaching certificates, and are they the experts? Which is a very progressive
Yes.
early 20th century ideology, is this idea that experts know more and are smarter and are better. And yet we see what happened in 2020 with the quote experts. And I think there's now a rising distrust of people, or is it mistrust? There, we're starting to not trust people, the experts that tell us stuff. But you bring up an important point that Joseph Ray, what he was 16 when he started teaching, and he didn't have a teaching degree. He just happened to be a little bit farther ahead than his pupils.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, um, okay, I want you to share. Are we good with time?
We're good. I'm
Okay.
okay.
Um, what a day would look like for you. And
Oh
I'm
yeah,
sure
we're
it's changed with the last one now that you just got one at home.
Well, I'll try to give you a picture when I had like little ones and big ones all together,
Okay,
because
that'd be great.
I think that would be easier to do. So, well, this is I want to put in there that just because I might talk about having homeschooling in the morning, or our table time, or whatever you want to call it, in the morning, for a time, my husband worked the light shift and we had it in the evening
Hmm.
after dinner. And so whenever you have to do it. So if we're doing it in the morning, we wake up, we have the little babies and everything. Everybody has to eat. Everybody has to have their bodies cleaned. I know everybody talks about, like, well, we homeschool, so we stay in our pajamas till 4 o'clock in the
Yeah, I don't
afternoon.
know
I'm
if I can do
sorry.
that.
No,
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 I
no,
can't
no.
do that.
So, I mean, if something happened and we had to do that, we could do that. But the goal is to raise children who know how to clean themselves. And so anyway, so we get up, we have chores. My husband and I, we both are kind of neat nicks, so we like to have our house clean. I don't feel good about like having a dirty house and then doing whatever school we do. And I call it school. I know it's not really technically school. I know people hate that word, but that's what I call it. We call it
Yeah.
schoolies. That's what we call it. So anyway, so all we would do is we would wake up, get everybody clean, get the breakfast done. We do morning chores, make sure the house is neat and clean before we start. Then I would sit down and I would do like the morning basket. I used to call it the morning basket, but I used to call it my learning basket, not really morning basket, a long time ago, long before morning basket even came about. So I would have books in my basket. Like I would have maybe you were working through some poetry. So I'd have a poetry book, maybe. We might be, and I'd always have a read aloud. And usually it was historical fiction or something like that. And so or a classic, and I would read that aloud. Then we might sing some hymns. We like to sing hymns together a cappella, or something like that. And then we get through that, and then the older kids would have their own work that they would be doing, that I would not have to like nurse them through the whole thing, because they have to go a little autopilot on that. They had assignments, and I would have an assignment sheet where everybody knew what they were supposed to do each day of the week. Okay, so they would be sitting there doing that. Then I would take the youngest that I was teaching, and they would be first because they get antsy and they got to go do something else. So I would sit with them, and then I would be either teaching them their basic reading, maybe we could do some little math flashcards or something with the tiniest ones. And I'd always have like a baby nursing or a toddler playing at the same time. And so they would be sometimes, flushing things down the toilet or whatever. And so we'd all see, this, that when you have a large family, everybody helps take care of everybody. So
Yeah,
we had a
that's
million pairs of eyes looking and seeing what the little kids are doing. So they didn't get into as much mischief as you'd think. But I would be distracted doing something with someone, and the other kids, while they were doing their stuff, they would kind of keep an eye on the little kids. Anyway, so I'd be sitting there and we do some flashcard work, like teaching basic numbers, number recognition. I like to use a hundreds board. Like to use manipulatives, whatever. And I like spend 15 minutes with maybe some phonics flashcards, some basic stuff with the youngest person I'm teaching. Then they can go off and play. Then that's their time. They've had enough learning for the day, because when you're that little, you don't need a lot of everything. You don't have to
Yeah.
hold the whole program, and you just have fun with them just for a few minutes, and then be available for them to ask questions, to cuddle, to be empathetic with them, and just let them play. Right. So then if there was someone else that I needed, let's say that then I would sit at the table
Mhm.
and I would preside over what's happening. We had this huge table. I mean, this thing was like 10 feet long, and I would sit there at the head, and then everybody would I have pictures of this, and people would be sitting there and they'd be doing their separate work.
Mhm.
Now that meant that I was fielding questions. I was making sure people were staying on track. I was, if they needed some correction, usually the types of materials I did not correct everybody's work all the time.
Okay. Yeah.
I could not have done that and still had a brain at the end of the day. So the stuff that we used was self-correcting for the most part. Now, if there was a writing assignment, I would go over that. I love writing. I love teaching writing. So I was fine with that. And, the math, I would often have to ask, answer questions about math because, it takes a lot sometimes to overcome certain things. So I was mostly available for fielding questions. And then as soon as the people, we'd get off on rabbit trails too. Okay. Someone would ask a question and we just like throw everything to the wind and we just dive into whatever that was. Like, Mom, when you were reading this morning about World War II, I noticed that the Japanese did this. Well, let's look this up. So then for the next 3 hours, we're doing that. And lunch comes. And so we're going, oh, we got to make lunch. And then so we're eating lunch. Maybe we're eating it outside at the table. And then usually we would wrap things up about 1 o'clock. And then we would clean, and then everybody would have quiet time in the afternoon. That was an institution in my family to have quiet time in the afternoon. And people didn't have to go to sleep, but they could like read a book. They could, play with Legos quietly, whatever. And that's when our older kids really spent a lot of time in their personal pursuits in the afternoons. And then we'd have the little kids would play, and then we'd have a cleanup before dinner. We'd eat dinner, then we'd clean up after that, and then family time in the evening. And that's how we did every day, pretty much.
I love that.
Okay. You probably do the same thing.
It's similar. This year has been a little bit different for us because they have enrichment programs all on different days. And it
Oh,
used to be I
wow.
had them all on the same day, and that was not possible this year. So we only have 2 days when everybody is together. Just two.
Right.
And so that's when I'm like, okay, this is in the mornings, and it's morning time for us. Is like, okay, everyone gets their chores done, and then we focus on the reading, the writing, the arithmetic, and then I'll pull in, depending on the season. Right now, we're heavily looking at the American Revolution, and
Yeah.
because of our country's birthday, and
Yeah.
so we're reading a lot of books about that. I don't have a set curriculum because people are like, "What's your curriculum?" But I'm like,
It's
we're
like,
just reading
yeah,
books and
like,
watching documentaries and
yes, how
playing
fun. Oh,
playing
why
games.
would you want to limit it with some stupid book that you're bored with?
Right.
And
Right.
you always forget everything. Like why not just watch like a reenactment of like the Gettysburg battle
Yeah.
or something? You know what I'm saying? Why do you have to like read about it? Well, the Gettysburg okay.
Yeah, but that doesn't, they don't internalize that though. They
No.
don't internalize it unless it's
Mm-mm.
presented in a story or in a way that makes it compelling and makes it personal for them. So
Exactly.
we'll do things like that, depending. And right now, again, the focus is the American Revolution. And sometimes we'll bring in, I've been using more and more the Socratic method and just asking questions, and we always do a read aloud. So
Yes.
we're reading
Oh,
a
I love
short one
that.
today. We're reading a Year of Miss Agnes, which I've never read. So I'm like, guys, we're going to read this. And we're almost done. And it's taken like 5 minutes because it's such a little book. But yeah. And so that's what the 2 days that we have. But my daughter brought up, she said, Mom, my 10-year-old said, since our enrichment programs have been on different days this year, we haven't gotten to go on many field trips. And that's where my heart is.
Aw.
So I said, well, next year you're all almost on the same day again. So we'll
Good.
do more, and we'll do some during the summer, but
Sometimes I think that partly, now I don't know, not everybody's the same, but we get so into the public school mindset that we have to prove to others that we're doing it right,
yeah.
that we can actually work ourselves out of actually enjoying the best parts of homeschooling because we're trying to prove to everybody else that we're doing it right. So in
Yeah.
other words, we have to have all the extracurriculars and all that stuff in there because other people have to see that we're really okay like everybody else.
Yeah.
Instead of being confident in, well, maybe we're not like everybody else, but I think we're doing great,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I've got, yeah,
And
my kids are happy and they're
yeah,
thriving and they're doing well and they can read and
yeah.
write.
At a certain point, see, I don't have anything to prove anymore. I have 15 children, just shut up. But anyway, but the thing of it is at a certain point though, I had to go, I don't really care what anybody thinks. I know what goes on here every day, and the proof is in the pudding. And I think I mean, I might have one or two kids that really struggle, but not, in certain areas. But in general, my kids, they contribute.
Yeah.
They are not leeches on society. They are not, they're the ones that are called in when all the other people are flaking off. My
Wow.
kids are the ones that hold it up.
I love that.
And so I don't really care what you think about whether or not my kids, took gymnastics.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't care
Yep.
because I know what we did was foundational for the rest of their lives. And it's helped them to be better parents.
Mm.
It's helped them to be better spouses. It's helped them, they pay their taxes, and I don't really, and they're paying for your social security. And so, no, I'm kidding. Anyway, I go on.
So I was thinking about this because prior to homeschooling, my kids were in all of the things. They were in the gym. They were in gymnastics. My daughter was in gymnastics and dance and soccer. My kids were all in soccer and t-ball, and there was one other sport that I had them do basketball. So we did all of the sports. And I remember being so frazzled and resenting going to. I remember sitting there at a t-ball game, resenting being there. And I thought, oh, I just hate this. And I did slow down a little bit one year. I was like, we're just going to do it one semester because I can't do it the others.
Right. Yeah.
But then I pulled way back when we started homeschooling. And I'm so glad we did. Not that we don't ever do extracurricular. My 13-year-old said, Mom, I really would like to run. And so on Monday he'll start running track with the public school, because he's like, I really would like to do this. I'm like, yeah, then let's make it happen. But I'm not going to just put him in. Our neighbors are the most wonderful. They're most wonderful neighbors and they're great. But my daughter came home and she's like, they can't play again. They just got home from school. I'm like, why not? And she's like, well, because they have basketball and then after that they have piano, or they have this and then they have this.
I see.
And it's, and then it's dinner time and then it's bedtime and then they do it all over again. And she's like, why do they have to be so busy? And I said, well, that's how their family's chosen to do things, but but it's okay. And she's like, is it okay that we're not busy like that?
Yes.
And I said 100%,
Yes,
because I wouldn't make it. So what advice, okay, well, before I ask that, what's one thing that we haven't talked about and I haven't asked you about that you wish I would have?
I don't know. I think I've had a great time talking my head off.
Likewise. This has been so fun.
I can't really think of anything. I think that we've covered all the basic things. I think that I really want to emphasize that it's important that as we come from our own homeschool background, public school backgrounds, and as we forge ahead into new territories, things that we haven't experienced before, we're used to being bolstered up by a system, by people's opinions. The whole culture is set up to bolster. Did I say this is bolster twice? To bolster the conventional compulsory education system. And we have been trained like a bunch of cattle, going through and, doing what they say, where, they funnel us in these different, avenues. This is what you're going to do. And we're so used to it that it's like a bird. Like if you have a parakeet and that parakeet's been in its cage its whole life, and you open the door and you allow that parakeet to fly out, they do not know what to do with themselves. They get all freaky because they don't have any bars as their security.
Hmm.
And when you homeschool, you are removing a lot of the underpinnings that you have been depending on your whole life. And it's a totally new thing to have freedom. You don't know what to do with it at first, and it's okay. If you need to do curriculum or whatever you need to do so that you're still on the path, but you have some things that are making you feel a little more secure, totally understandable. But just know this, that once you get out of that cage and you have that taste of freedom and you start flying, you'll never want to go back in. And you'll find out that there's more support out there than you realize. And sometimes you start making your own support. You'll start making things happen, and that's how the culture changes. That's how society changes. That's how we start putting in place the things that God instituted, the family and the church. Those were the institutions. They wanted to replace it with education. They openly stated it hundreds of times since Horace Mann. They have openly stated that they have wanted to replace the family and the church with the state and with education, the compulsory education system. But there is something better.
I love that. Last word of advice for brand new homeschooling moms. What would you say?
I would say the best, most important thing to do is just to enjoy your children. Because your kids only have a few short years with you. And if you are so worried about living up to someone else's standards or what everybody else is expecting of you, and you start focusing that as what you're putting on your child, you're never going to know who they are just for them. So you have to pull back. You're going to discover yourself again. If you can pull out of the system and decompress and just maybe take however long, like 6 months even, and just read, go to the library, check out all the fun books that you like to read aloud for hours and hours, go to the park and just play, go in nature and explore nature together and cuddle and sit on the couch and just hold each other while you read. Just enjoy everything about that child, and that child will start to trust you and they'll start to open up to you. And then when you do teach them, maybe, the hard things like complex multiplication, they are going to be more open to what you have to say. And you're going to be less frustrated with them because you're going to have this relationship, because education should be built on relationship, not on systems. And so I think that's the best advice I could give.
Oh, that is perfect advice. Thank you. What is the best way if somebody wants to get a hold of you or find you? Where can they find you?
Okay. I am on YouTube as Mom Delights. I'm on Substack as Mom Delights. I have a website, momdelights.com, and I have a contact page on my website. I think it's under the About. It's a contact. And so people can email me. I don't share my email address for obvious reasons, but they can contact me via email and on Substack and, in the comment section on my YouTube channel as well. And I try to respond almost 100%. I'm not 100%, but I'm almost 100% on all my comments on YouTube. I try to respond in some way.
That's fantastic. Well, Sherry, thank you so much. Amen to all of it, to everything that you've said.
You are so precious.
So thank you for coming. Mm-hmm. Mamas and papas, grandmas and grandpas, you are doing so much better than you think you are. You have got this. We will talk next week.
Okay.